Welcome to Uncolored. I'm Kevin Metcalf. Thanks for tuning in again. We're going to continue this talk about determinism, materialist determinism, not the theistic determinism. This is materialism from the materialist side, or the physicalism, or materialism, physicalism. There's another name for it. But this is from a group of people who think that the only things that exist is matter, energy, laws of nature, that kind of stuff. And anything that is immaterial, like the mind, like a soul, like thoughts, beliefs, those kinds of things, either A, don't exist, they have to deny their existence, or B, exist as part of the mechanistic process of matter and energy. They either supervene or emerge, or emergent properties, one of the two. Both ideas seem problematic to me. But, you know, I'm the dumbest guy here, so. So we're going to listen to Hossenfefer, and she's going to explain this idea. Now, we're going to get into this idea in more detail in later presentations. I was trying to think of a better word for later, a more cool. So, but for right now, I just want to deal with one part of what she says right here, because this is something that just shouldn't happen in any conversation where people are trying to discover truth. And it's what I call rhetorical coercion. It's the idea that if you don't believe me, there's some negative thing about you or going to happen to you if you don't agree with the way I see the world. So let me run this part of it. And we're just going to talk about this today. It's going to be a bit extemporaneous because, again, I don't want to present the rest of it before I kind of have it, you know, well enough to explain it properly, which may never happen. But for right now, let's just listen to this from Mrs. Hossenfefer. I think that's her name. I'm saying it right.
Detail was determined already at the Big Bang. We're just watching it play out. These deterministic laws of nature apply to you and your brain because you are made of particles. And what happens with you is a consequence of what happens with those particles. A lot of people seem to think this is a philosophical position. They call it materialism or reductionism and think that giving it a name that ends on ism is an excuse to not believe it. Well, of course you can insist to just not believe reductionism is correct, but this is denying scientific evidence. We do not guess, we know that brains are made of particles, and we do not guess, we know that we can derive from the laws for the constituents what the whole object does. If you make a claim to the contrary, you are contradicting well-established science. I can't prevent you from denying scientific evidence, but I can tell you that this way you will never understand how the universe really works.
Okay, so there's a lot of problems I have with this presentation. God bless her. And it's not even the scientific part yet. It's just the start. You know, there's this thing of we know this. We know. Who's the we she's talking about? Again, this is part of that rhetorical coercion that I'm talking about. I want to make you think when I say we, I'm talking about everybody who's a scientist. That's the we she's talking about. The we she's really talking about is a group of people who are materialists. All scientists are not materialists. So when she says, we know this and we know that, it's deceptive, in my opinion. Just say, you know, materialists believe X, and this is why. But to say we, she's trying to give the impression that all of science is in agreement on this. And it's just nonsense. It's part of the setup. And if your ideas are good, you don't have to set people up like this. The other thing she says is when they talk about reductionism, or she says just because you name it, you don't have to believe it. Okay, this is what's called a straw man. Okay, nobody thinks that because you're naming something determines whether you have to believe it or not. When you name something, you're giving it sort of a handle so people know what you're talking about. That's what they're saying. You get the characteristics of something and they go, okay, that's what you're talking about this. So we know that we're talking about the same thing. That's all it is. Whether you agree with it or not has nothing to do with the name of it. I was talking to, somebody who believes in a particular way, who I've criticized before. I don't know why I'm not saying it. I just don't want to be banging on people. I don't want to hammer on folks. And he did this, and they do the same thing. It's this insecurity. And I was criticizing the idea, and they go, oh, you think I'm a this. And I go, well, and he goes, I'm not a this. I'm not. And he starts denying who it is. And I go, listen, I don't care what you call it. I'm just saying those ideas are associated with that. If you want to call it something different, I don't care. I just want to know that we're talking about the same thing. That's all I'm trying to do. Whether you want to be called that, if you don't like that particular name and you want to whatever you want to call it, I don't care. I'm just trying to understand that we're talking about the same thing. And so Hossenfefer's idea that just because you name it doesn't mean you don't have to believe it, it's just a stupid thing to say. It's unnecessary. The reason ideas in philosophy and science have names is for identification purposes, so that two people know we're talking about the same thing. Has nothing to do with whether you believe it or not. But you can hear the insecurity in her voice because this is a defensive thing here. What are you so defensive about? Because some people don't believe your idea. That's the problem. That's why you hear all of this idea. And then she goes into the whole thing that we know this. We know this. Again, who's the we you're talking about? Is it all scientists? Well, obviously not. So who's the we? And you'll hear this all of the time in all kinds of areas of discussion. Well, we already know this, or everybody knows. Well, no, everybody doesn't know. That's why we're talking about it. But people who are into rhetorical shenanigans and rhetorical coercion play all of these tricks. And all of these tricks are to do one thing: cover up an idea that they themselves know is bad. And their goal is to get you all over here to think that everybody believes on one side. To think that just because you're naming it, that doesn't mean you have to believe it. These kinds of straw men. Because once you start getting to the details and the arguments for and against, I'm sorry, materialism as a worldview, it just blows up. And I think many materialists understand this. Thomas Nagel knows it. And he's still a materialist. At least, I don't know, maybe not. I think he might be dead by now. But I mean, he held to it. But he knew there's some big problems. But the great thing about Thomas Nagel is he wasn't a coward about it, like Hossenfefer is. This is just cowardly what she's doing. She's trying to preload the conversation with all of these invectives and all of these straw men, so that now you don't even want to question it. If you're not an independent thinker, and if you're not an active listener, and you don't have the courage to stand for your own ideas and look for the truth, you're swayed by her, we know this. If you disagree with this, you're disagreeing with science. That's just BS. Because scientists who are materialists say that's not the way it goes. Determinism is an idea that some people hold to, and I think for bad reasons, and I've illustrated them here. It has a problem with location. It has a problem with the idea of causal closure. There's a lot of problems, qualia. And so I just wanted to point out that this is just something that, you know what it comes from? It comes from, I think, a larger societal problem. This isn't a new thing. There's a larger thing at work here. Let me see if I can put this together, because again, this is all extemporaneous. There are people who are around there's two kinds of people. There's the one who says, I'm trying to figure out the world and I want the best ideas. There's another group of people, and I think you can probably be one of each at any time. I don't think that you're just either one or the other, but I think that there are another group of people, and unfortunately it seems to be most people, who have grown up with an idea, inherited an idea, their friends think of an idea, the people that they like have an idea, whatever it is. but they're married to the idea. I think, like Lewontin said perfectly, they have an a priori commitment to the idea. And I think in science, materialism specifically has this draw to materialists, is that it keeps me away from having to stare at God. And as long as I can say materialism is true, I don't have to think about God. I can keep God at bay as long as materialism is true. That's what I think is at the heart of materialism. But again, I think there's a larger societal issue here. Some people just can't handle it when you don't agree with me. There's fear there. Because if you don't agree with me, then there's a chance that you might understand the world better than I do, or at least this part of it. And that's not something people can deal with. Because that means now I've got to change my worldview. I got to make some kind of an adjustment. And we just don't want to do that. So what do I have to do? I have to resort to these kind of just crappy tactics, man. I've got to misrepresent your idea. I've got to threaten you that if you don't agree with me, you're going to be something like this. It's a sad thing to do. And so rather than consider the possibility that I may be wrong, I'm going to try and force you to agree with me. I'm going to try and force you to agree with me. That's the idea of rhetorical coercion. And there have been systems that have been set up in society by, groups of people, that seems to me, to help facilitate that form of coercion. Political correctness is one. Political correctness is an idea that if I say you're politically correct, then I can punish you, and I don't really care about what the actual facts and data say. There's no objective standard. Political correctness is a way to enforce societal rules apart from an objective standard. So now only the people in power can tell you what's right and wrong, and it changes every day, and it changes from person to person. Before political correctness, or at least the idea outside of political correctness, is just an objective standard. Either you're correct or you're not correct. When they add that word to it, they're trying to remove the objective standard that everyone has access to. I mean, something's right, it's right, objectively, and create a subjective standard so that only the powerful and elite can now determine who's right and who's wrong. That's the idea behind political correctness. Social justice, same thing. Critical race theory, all of these, what they call new ideas, these are very, very old ideas. This is nothing new. But it's all the same thing. A society that's founded on objective standards of right and wrong, the way you destroy that society is inject a subjective standard of judgment that only the powerful have access to. And so now I can go and I can fire you from your job or keep you from working, not because you're objectively right or wrong, but because you don't agree with me. This is the idea behind this. And so while the ideas of this form of verbal coercion, getting people to agree with me, has sort of been codified today, again, in political correctness, social justice, and a lot of the woke stuff, a lot of the far crazy right, left stuff does this stuff, these kinds of tactics. And the goal is this. Either I'm correct and my ideas actually mirror the objective world, or they don't. And the way you know that is based on data and evidence, discussion, right? You debate those kinds of things. And then that helps you determine, well, what idea more accurately mirrors society? Well, with these subjective standards of political correctness, social justice, critical race theory, now you don't have that anymore. And what they are doing is if I can brand you as something evil, well, now I don't have to deal with the data and the evidence anymore. So if you were to criticize a black guy or a group of black folks for some behavior that you say, that's not the correct way to behave, well, you're automatically a racist, especially if you're white, right? Because you're not even supposed to criticize a black person. So now, rather than be called a racist, I'm afraid of the name. So I'm not going to speak the truth, that I see them engaged in behavior that seems to be detrimental to them and society around them. I'm not going to say anything about it. Why? There's a name that I'm going to be called. And people are more afraid of the name calling than they are speaking the truth. And the whole point of these ideas and this codification of this subjective standard of judging right and wrong is so that now truth isn't even an issue. Having the name, being branded, is far more important than understanding the truth. Whether it's any protected class, gays, blacks, whites, whatever it is, whatever the quote unquote protected classes are, any criticism levied their way. The question is the criticism correct? Not even a question. We don't even want to know the truth about the criticism. We just don't want that name to be called. And so now truth becomes second to this sort of cultural Marxism is what it really is. It's just a Marxist idea. And so what they're going to do is, I need you to see the world the way I do. And that's what these structures are meant to do. I'm going to call you a name and hoping that you don't want to be that name so that now you agree with me. And if I can get you focused on not being called that name, then automatically we're not even going to talk about the data and evidence. And people who do this are demonstrating two things. One, they are scared as hell. It's fear and a lack of self-awareness. Again, the fear comes in. I love this idea, and I've tied my identity to the idea. So if you disagree with the idea, you're disagreeing with me. If you think the idea is wrong, you think I'm wrong, because now it's a personal thing. So any challenge to the idea, I take that personally. Instead of going, well, this is an idea, it seems like it works this way, here's the data for it. But if you disagree, well, what do you have? Show me what you got. If it's better, then I need to make some changes. They're not about that. Why? Their identity is tied up in the idea. So if you have a problem with the idea, you've got a problem with them personally. And that's what I think you heard in this, I think her name's Hossenfefer. She's not even concerned about the science. That's not even the thing. I know she puts it in a veneer of science, differential equations, those kinds of things, and that's fine. But there are people who are materialists in her own camp who will tell you she's wrong. She's taking her idea and trying to stretch it too far. Materialism is fantastic when you're talking about, certain things, doing science and finding out things that are material stuff. But when you wrap it around you like a worldview and try to make it stretch around all of existence, it starts to break apart. All kinds of holes pop up. And we're going to talk about those holes in the future, in future presentations. But there's location problems. There's phenomena that we all know are real that you can't locate in the concept of materialism. Right? Materialism itself has problems with the idea of causal closure. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about all these things. I don't want to get into it now because, again, I want to make sure I understand it at least well enough to present it properly. I'm sure I'm not going to get it all right, but I just wanted to address this thing right here because it's important to know that people are going to come at you all throughout society, and they're going to be one of two types of people. It's probably more, but we'll just talk about these two. There are those kinds of people, and I think they're rare, who really just want to understand how the world works. And they have ideas about how the world works. But they're also interested in what you think, because they think by learning more and what other people think, they can enhance their own model of reality. Then you have the other group of folks, and unfortunately, I think this is most people. They've grown up in some paradigm, and they're married to it, just like Lewontin said. They're committed. They have an a priori commitment to some sort of a paradigm. And they're so committed to it that the truth isn't even an issue anymore. It's I gotta hold up the paradigm. And when things start knocking the walls down, I've got to find a way to stop it. And one way to stop it is to say, if you don't agree with me, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're a science denier. And when somebody comes out with that, it's insecurity. That's all it is. It's totally insecure. I'm going to find that video again of Dr. Craig and play it at the end, where what he does is he's talking about the evidence for the beginning of the universe. He uses it in his cosmological argument. And he talks about Alexander Lincoln and Allen and Guth, and all the evidence that says, any universe on average that's expanding has a definite beginning. He's using data from people who don't believe in God. And at the end of it, he just says, listen, this is the date, this is the evidence, this is what it looks like to me, but there's more discoveries to be had, and we welcome the conversation. That's somebody who's not insecure. That's somebody who's comfortable with their idea, they're comfortable with themselves. This Hossenfefer gal, insecure all day long. Here's the other problem. Here's the other thing that it demonstrates when people say this. This, if you don't believe me, you're a this. If you don't agree with me, if you don't see the world the way I do, I got a name to call you. It shows a horrible lack of self-awareness. Listen, just a cursory evaluation of your own life should show you that at least one time when you thought you were 100% correct, turns out you were wrong. And you would have bet, the world that you were right. Turns out you were wrong. And so if you just understand, if you just understand the possibility that, it looks this way to me, but maybe I'm not getting it right, then you don't say stupid things like that. That's just a dumb thing to say. You'd be more like Dr. Craig, where he says, listen, this is how it looks. This is the evidence. But, if you've got something different, we'd love to discuss it. I haven't seen anybody more comfortable in their own skin and their own ideas than Dr. Craig. Because I think he's got great ideas, and I think he thinks he's got great ideas, and he has no problem dealing with or talking to the greatest minds on the planet about it. Comfortable in his own skin. Here you have Hossenfefer telling you that people that even who are materialists are denying science, because there are people who are materialists who would tell you straight up, she ain't seeing it right. She's going too far. She's trying too hard. And so those are the two things that I see here: a lack of self-awareness and insecurity. And anytime you make a statement about what you think about the world and you say, this is the evidence, I think this is wrong, that doesn't look right to me, I don't know that they should be doing that kind of a thing. Somebody comes back with, oh, you must be one of these, or you must be an ist on this, or racist, homophobe, science denier. Whenever somebody tells you this, you know two things. They're very, very scared of you challenging their ideas. And they're hoping your response will be, no, I'm not. So now we're not even talking about the truth of your idea or the accuracy of your claim or any evidence that could support it. We're not even talking about that anymore. You're on your heels trying not to be called something. That's what this is, what she did. And it has no place in science. It has no place in any intelligent discussion, which is why it's so frustrating, because you hear it so much from science. Listen, it's not just science. You hear it from people who believe in God. I spent some time criticizing an idea that I'm less than enthralled by, in theism, people who believe in God. And oftentimes you'll hear the same thing. Oh, you're not disagreeing with me, you're disagreeing with God. I'm just telling you what God's telling you. That they're superimposing themselves over God. Same thing Hossenfefer's doing here. She's saying, I'm science. I'm all that science is. And if you disagree with me, you're disagreeing with science. It's such an arrogant, ignorant place to be. And it's not just people who don't believe in God. It happens for people who believe in God all the time. That's why I go back to that thing that I said in the last video about Louis Beck. It's not just people who believe in God who can believe in anything. Anybody who doesn't keep their ideas wrapped tight in logic and reason, and stop trying to stretch an idea further than it's built to go, further than its explanatory resources have, then yeah, you can believe all kinds of nutty stuff. The point I just wanted to bring in here, and I apologize for rambling, is that Hossenfefer, while I'm sure she's a brilliant scientist, she's insecure, and she clearly does not want you to challenge her ideas, because we're going to get into it. We're gonna look at some of the problems with her, what she's telling you, and there are many. And if she's and I think part of it is that she's painfully aware of that. When you do that at the beginning of a conversation, say, hey, if you don't believe me, then you're something like this. You poison the well. Because now, if you have those people who, listen, cowardly. I don't want anybody to call me a particular name. Well, now you've poisoned the well, because now everything she says after that, rather than just look at it objectively, you're looking at it as, if I disagree with her, then I'm one of these. It poisons the well. It may even be subconsciously. But there's no need at the front end of a conversation to say anything stupid like that. Not if you want to have an honest, objective conversation, and clearly she does not. Not if you're starting it out like that. That's the problem that I have with that. Don't mind that she disagrees. Tons of people disagree. But if you're going to have an honest conversation about that, that has no place in it. The whole, if you don't believe me, you're of this. And there's just no place for that. And that's the problem that I have with it. All right, so I'm going to leave you with this with Dr. Craig. This is how you do it, in my opinion.
Theorems has increasingly tightened the loop around empirically tenable models by showing that under more and more generalized conditions, a beginning is inevitable. For example, in 1970, Hawking and Penrose formulated the singularity theorems which bear their name, which show that any universe governed by the equations of general relativity must shrink down to an initial singularity. In 2003, three prominent cosmologists, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, were able to prove a theorem to the effect that any universe which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion over its history cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a beginning. And that goes for expanding multiverse scenarios as well. In 2012, Vilenkin showed that models which do not meet this single condition of the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem nevertheless fail for other reasons to avert the beginning of the universe. He concluded, and I quote, "None of these scenarios can actually be past eternal. All the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning." Now that's a remarkable statement. It would be important if Vilenkin said the evidence for a beginning of the universe outweighs the evidence against a beginning of the universe. But he didn't say that. He said all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. I am not aware of any evidence that the universe is past eternal. There's simply nothing on that side of the scale. So that the evidence for the beginning of the universe, while not rendering this certain, I think certainly justifies Vilenkin's conclusion that the universe probably did begin to exist. So, whether the universe began in the quantum regime or with classical space-time, the universe began to exist. Now, of course, scientific results are always provisional. Science doesn't deal in certainties, it deals in probabilities. And we can fully expect that new theories will be proposed trying to avoid the universe's beginning. And these proposals are to be welcomed and tested. But nevertheless, I think it's pretty clear which way the evidence points. Today, the proponent of the Kalam cosmological argument stands comfortably within the scientific mainstream in holding that the universe began to exist.
Okay, that's the way you do it. This is the evidence, this is the data, but there's more things to be discovered, and we can talk about it then. Totally confident in this position, and open to other ideas, not this demagoguery, this pedantic, closed-minded idea that this Hossenfefer has. It shouldn't happen. Not in science, not in theology, not in society. People should be able to explore ideas. People should be able to go, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't see it that way for these reasons, without being called something. And that's not the society that we're endorsing anymore. And things like this don't help. So All right, that's it. I'm out of here. Thanks for tuning in. Next week, we'll get into it a little bit deeper, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a primer about what she's saying and why I think it's wrong, because I don't want that idea to carry out throughout it. I just like to have a discussion. I'll show you what some of the people who disagree with her think, and as always, you decide what you want. It's not that I don't care. If I didn't care, I wouldn't be doing it, but I'm saying you shouldn't believe anything because I think it. You should believe it because you've investigated. You're an independent thinker, you're an active listener, and you come to whatever conclusions you come to. All right, that's enough. Get out of here.